Let me call the hearing to order again, and I thank the witnesses for their understanding as we voted. And let me recognize Senator Rosen.
Oh, it is. Well, thank you, Chairman Reed. It pays to be the first one back from votes, doesn't it? So thank you. I want to thank you for testifying. Thank you for your years of service and continual service. I know you're going to continue to serve on, and for everyone else that is here. But we've got a lot going on with Russia, so I want to talk about Russian cyber threats, General Nakasone, because last month President Biden warned that Russia is exploring options for cyber attacks targeting the U.S. The elevated threat level comes as we know Russia's launching cyber attacks against Ukraine, hitting the country's national telecommunications industry just last week, and causing great denial of service disruptions. And so last week, Senator Rounds and I called on the administration to brief Congress on how we're protecting critical infrastructure right here in the U.S., and I'm happy to report that just last night, Director Easterly was with us in a classified briefing to talk about what CISA is doing. And so, can you tell me how Cybercomm has been coordinating with Ukraine to harden their networks? And as you conduct your hunt forward operations to identify network vulnerabilities, are you sharing that not just with Ukraine, but all the NATO allies, particularly the border countries that were helping to provide that military and humanitarian relief?
Yes, Senator, as I mentioned, we had a hunt forward team that deployed to Ukraine at the end of 2021 and spent well over 2 months working with our partners there to harden their networks, focused on a number of key critical assets. The big piece about hunt forward, though, is not only the fact that we understand the networks of our allies as they and partners as they invite us in there, but it's also understanding what our adversaries are doing, and then, to your point, sharing that broadly, not only with our partners and NATO, but also with the private sector. Critical infrastructure is within the private sector, so as we expose these type of things, they're broadly being able to shine a light on this type of activity.
Yeah, I think it's important, and I know this isn't classified, but can you speak broadly about some of the insights you might have gained as we think about, as the Russians have launched cyber attacks on Ukraine, and we think about the heightened alert, the shields up, how we're trying to do that here. Can you speak broadly about some of the insights that we've gained? Are they using their state-sponsored networks? Are they using criminal networks?
So broadly, Senator, what I would say is what we learned is obviously what we had a pretty clear indication, which is the fact that there's a persistence that the Russians have towards this type of activity, and they have been in the Ukraine for a long time. So being able to identify the persistence, being able to identify the adversaries, being able to share that information, again, broadly with our partners, broadly with our allies in NATO, and then most importantly with the private sector, again, reinforces this idea of you can't hide in terms of what you're doing.
Thank you. I look forward to some more classified briefings with everyone. But I want to move on to you, General Clarke, because we know the world is watching. We know Iran is watching. We know this for sure. And so we have to combat Iranian aggression. And in several previous hearings, we know Iran and Iran-aligned militia groups, they're increasingly targeting the United States installations and service members in Iraq and Syria via rocket and, of course, drone attacks. On a regular basis, Iran is, of course, we know, the world's leading state sponsor of terrorism. They threaten the United States. They threaten our allied interest in the Middle East and around the world via both direct attacks and through its support for Hezbollah and the Islamic Republic's other terrorist proxies such as KH and AAH. So can you discuss the threat Iranian-aligned militia groups in the Middle East are posing to our U.S. troops and allies? And do you believe the United States, how do you think we should respond as you're currently addressing this threat? Do you have the necessary authorities besides the ability to act in self-defense?
Senator, I've spent a long amount of time in the CENTCOM area, and specifically in Iraq. And I've watched the Shia militia groups, as you accurately described, their capabilities, which are only growing, particularly as General McKenzie identified to this committee in the missile and in their unmanned aerial systems, which threaten U.S. forces. I'd leave the policy side to what we do with the authorities to Mr. Maier, But at the same hand, I would say that we continue with our special operations forces to provide options for those policymakers by seeing and understanding how they can conduct these attacks and try to be in front of those attacks to provide those options.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, I see my time is up. Yield back. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Rosen. Senator Tuberville, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for being here today. General Clarke, thank you for your service. General Clarke, in January 21, the DoD awarded Teledyne Brown Engineering a contract to continue production on the Mark 11 shallow water combat submersible. These subs are used to deliver Navy SEALs and their equipment to special operations. When do you expect these Mark 11s to be delivered, all of them?
I'll take that one for the record because we do have a timeline over years, Senator. But what I'm committed to, and I take it broader, is that this capability for a maritime undersea collection is critical for our nation to be able to work in the littorals and team with the Navy to be able to do those type of operations.
Do we need more of them?
Senator, I think what we have requested has been sufficient, and if we believe we need more of that unique capability, because it's not just that delivery system, but it's other SEAL delivery systems that we're putting towards to give variances of the type of capabilities we will need. But if we need more, I'll come back to this committee and to the department.
Good, thank you. Secretary Maier, to what do you attribute the cost and time overruns of Block 2 of the dry combat submersible, an important asset for the Pacific?
Senator, I would like to also take that for the record. That's a complicated answer that I don't have all the details on, but we'll get you a written response.
Take more than 5 minutes to explain that, probably wouldn't it?
Yes, it would, sir.
In November, Acting Secretary of Defense Chris Miller enacted the FY 217 NDAA requirement to elevate SOLIC positions to be a par with the other service secretaries, but last May, Secretary Austin reversed this decision, burying SOLIC back under the Undersecretary of Defense for Policy. SOLIC is still understaffed and isn't getting the routine direct access to the Secretary and Deputy Secretary. It should, as directed by the NDAA. As a service secretary, do you control acquisition and budget items in your purview?
So, Senator, by law, I do not for acquisition, but I approve the special operations budget. So the answer is yes to one and no to the other.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to say this, that, Secretary Austin changed us back, but this body really believe in civilian oversight, and hopefully we can get back to that somehow. General Nakasone, in July 2021, General Hayden said that the joint warfighting concept had, quote, failed in many different ways, end quote. Couldn't produce a victory against an aggressive red team and needed a new emphasis on space and cyber. Where specifically regarding the Indo-Pacific did the joint warfighting concept, JWC, fall short with cyber?
So, Senator, this is one that I certainly will take for the record, just because I want to provide a classified response to that. There is some very unique things that we have addressed, but again, I think it's better to put that in a classified response.
All right. What resources to ensure cyber protections across the joint force have you asked for and not received? Is there anything that you hadn't received that you've asked for?
Senator, not right now. I think the broader question, which the department is working towards right now, is how big a cyber force, and that's a study that's being undertaken right now. We will grow by 14 different teams over the FIDUP, but I think that, in our estimations, that is probably a down payment on a broader force that's going to be necessary for the nation.
How can we help you in this coming budget?
I think the biggest piece is just the continued support of our talent initiatives. We've talked about this. The importance of being able to grow a force begins well before they ever are recruited for any of the services or enter civilian service.
Thank you. I'd love for you to come to Alabama and check our new cyber technology and engineering school, grades 9 through 12, top in the state. Started 2 years ago. It is unbelievable and going to be unbelievably successful. will open the doors of its new building this year coming up in September. And we have over 150 in it now, and it is an amazing place of education, and I think it's going to be very beneficial to what you're doing. And I'm talking about high school kids. I'm not talking about college. And these kids will be ready to go to work as soon as they get out of high school. So hopefully one day you can visit in Huntsville.
Senator, I would enjoy that. I would also ask Senator to solicit your assistance for our academic engagement network for U.S. Cyber Command. We have 4 institutions within the state of Alabama, but given your long experience as an educator, I think your proponency within the state of Alabama could double that number.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Tuberville. Senator King, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before beginning my questions, I want to associate myself with the questions of Senator Rounds about National Security Presidential Memorandum 13. My understanding is that the administration is considering changes. Substantial changes, I believe, would be a grave mistake. It would undermine deterrence at the worst possible moment. And I've communicated that to the White House along with Congressman Mike Gallagher, my co-chair of the Cyberspace Solarium Commission. General Nakasone, if you can answer this in an open session, why no Russian serious cyber attack in Ukraine? We all thought that was going to be the first thing they did, and it didn't happen. I know there were some attacks, but nothing of the scale that we were expecting. Do we have an answer to that?
So, Senator, I think I'd begin by saying we're not out of Ukraine yet, and so obviously our position right now is one of vigilance in terms of anything that might still be done. In terms of what the Russians decided to, I would anticipate that this was based upon a series of assumptions that they may have made. I think coupled with the defensive capabilities that we were able to work with a number of partners within Ukraine. And then thirdly, I think is just a realization that a lot of times these are very, very difficult attacks to be able to conduct.
Yeah, I think their assumption was the war would last a week, so they didn't really have to do that. That seems to be one of their gravest mistakes. I'm concerned about attribution. If we're going to respond to cyber attacks, we have to have timely attribution. Are the U.S. government's attribution assets adequate? Do we coordinate adequately? Who's in charge of attribution if a cyber attack occurred tomorrow? Is it you? Is it NSA? Is it the FBI? Is it CISA? Where does that responsibility fall?
So certainly, Senator, there is a combination of all of those that lead to attribution, to include our partners as we work very closely with them. I think the other one that I would add is the private sector. You know, when you consider some of our private sector entities that have over 300 million endpoints in the United States, being able to understand what's going on there is critical for what we're able to see. But ultimately, this is brought up to a policy level decision based upon what we're able to provide from intelligence and our partnerships with industry and foreign nations.
It makes me nervous when I hear the first part of the answer being coordination. I like it when somebody's in charge and responsible, but I understand that the coordination is important. One of the, I don't know if I'd call it a gap, but you mentioned, for example, outside of our borders. That's where NSA's responsibility is, CIA's responsibility is. We're no longer in a world of borders, and what concerns me is a cyber attack that originates in a foreign country but goes through a server in New Jersey or California, and therefore it's a great question as to where that cyber attack is coming from. Are we adequately, do we have adequate authorities and lines of authority and definitions to deal with a foreign cyber attack that comes through U.S. infrastructure?
So I think that we're making much better progress in being able to address some of those authority gaps. You've identified one of the areas that we certainly were relevant during the SolarWinds most recent supply chain attack, when our adversaries had positioned themselves within the United States, and we found that there was a blind spot there. So again, the breach notification that has been done, the discussions in terms of upping the standards for both national security systems and government systems that the administration have done, I think have all contributed to this. But you point out a key piece, Senator, which is this is much more difficult than one person being in charge. There's not one agency, one department, or even one entity that has all of the information, and so why this coordination is so important.
We talked about recruiting talent, and I know that's an issue that's been discussed in other questions. One of my questions is, what about tenure? is it an issue in Cybercomm that you have soldiers and sailors and Marines, people that come through, but they're only there for a limited period of time and then they move on, or do they move on within Cybercomm? Do we have enough continuity, or is that an issue that we need to address?
So that's an area that each of the services handles differently, and I think each of the services has to focus on this. Once we train an operator within our force, we're very, very reluctant to have them go back and do anything else but cyber. And I would offer that most of the cyber operators, that's all they want to do is cyber. And so, again, the investment in this and the repeat tours is critical for us to maintain our readiness.
So we do have repeat tours now. That's a standard part of the way you operate.
We certainly do, but I think there could be more.
General Clarke, I'm running out of time. Just a short question. Are you providing the kind of training that you did to the Ukrainians to other allies, particularly in Eastern Europe and in special operations?
Yes, sir, we are, and I can give you more detail or provide that for the record, and we continued that through what is going on in the Ukraine today.
Well, I think what's going on in Ukraine in terms of success has been attributable to lots of factors, but one of them is the training that you've provided. Thank you. Thank you.
I'd agree with that assessment. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator King. Senator Blackburn, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to each of you for the update. General Clarke, I want to talk about the small unit dominance for just a moment and see where you are with that to provide solutions for SOF small unit dominance. And what progress have you made to bolster the collaboration with external government and non-governmental organizations concerning advancement of adversary asymmetric advantages? And then when you look at your resource shortfalls, when it comes to information gathering, situational awareness, where are you with that? As you are very well aware, and as we have talked, Fort Campbell and the men and women that are stationed there, and this is something that's important to them.
Senator, you bring out a great point about our forces. Many times they are working in small teams and they're disaggregated, but they bring with that disaggregation some power of being able to work with foreign partners and providing them all the assets and tools and as we look at this at a point forward that very few could do, and that it's accepting to the host nation that they can work there because they have the culture, they have the language, and most times they're combat credible forces who've been tested on the battlefields in Iraq and Afghanistan and Syria. And providing them all the tools that they need. What we are focused on is specifically giving them the most tools that they can have for what we call the hyper-enabled operator that we're putting, that is one of my top 5 technology focus areas to make sure that they have those tools. And a lot of that will be, as you referenced, making sure that we can put artificial intelligence and machine learning forward at the edge where they are.
And in the 22 NDAA, SOCOM, we have the operating concept. You need to articulate an operating concept that supports the joint warfighting concept. And when you're looking at that joint landscape, how do you seek to define that, and then how are you filling in those gaps as you bring in and avail technology?
Senator, you're hitting a really key point, that working with AST Solek, who has given us guidance to actually look at our force structure and come up with that operating concept for 2040. Because I believe we have the force size that we need, but within that force size that we have, we actually have to do some restructuring to ensure that we can properly compete with a nation state like China and develop those unique capabilities that will be required for that future conflict.
Okay, and then in that vein, as you look at all of this, how are you going to bring into review different levels of and degrees of specialization and competence, and how do you do that with your existing force?
Yeah, the way we do it now, and it works best, is through experimentation. We actually create exercises and venues so that we can actually test those, and we're doing that today. So as you look at our operations and maintenance budget for this year of about $9.7 billion, that is what directly contributes, to that experimentation and building the future force that we will need.
Okay. Before I run out of time, General Nakasone, I always appreciate your insights. I want you to talk for just a minute about the value of the current cyber defense partnerships that you have and how that affects your multi-domain partnerships, how that affects your multi-capable operations.
Senator, let me begin with the partnerships in a number of different phases. So first of all, I would say our partnerships with the National Security Agency is critical to what we do. U.S. Cybercommand is powerful based upon our partnership with NSA. The second piece is the partnerships that we have with the private sector. As I mentioned, the change that's taking place in cyberspace is mainly taking place within the private sector. So having those partnerships, like our under advisement program that this committee sponsored, is critical for what we're doing. The third piece is partnerships with our allies. Hunt forward teams, 9 which were conducted in 2021 by the invite of foreign governments coming into their networks and understanding is critical.
Okay, I'm over time, but let me ask you, having those partnerships, does that help you to retain some of the human capital and the troops that you need to retain?
Most definitely. I mean, people want to work with the private sector. They want to be able to deploy. They want to be able to work with academic institutions. There's an excitement that goes with that.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Blackburn. Senator Manchin, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, thank all three of you for your service, and General Clarke, thank you and your family. I know how commitment that is and what a commitment it is, but now you get to spend hopefully a little time with them. To General Clarke and to Secretary Maier, this is for you all. I know the comments in your advanced testimony about Special Operation Forces, unique training authorities, and the need to maintain readiness in a diverse global environments that we're in. I wanted to make sure you are both aware that in West Virginia, we're working and making our state more available to SOCOM. Training operations, we have parts of this, we're only 3 hours away now. We're not that far. You can hop, skip, and a jump. Available for SOCOM operations. We have parts of the state that are in great condition for training opportunities if it hasn't been brought to your attention, from subterranean and complexes to austere rural and urban environments. There's a surface mine land that is possible for transfer to DOD for nothing, zero, $1 to make it legal probably. For the East Coast base units to train is significantly reduced cost compared to similar training that you're going to travel to the West Coast and do. It's right in your backyard. My office has been working with J3X representatives from SOCOM in our state, as well as the West Virginia National Guard, to highlight that what we have to offer, and I hope to have you out soon to do a site visit. If you could, I would appreciate it very much. So if your SOCOM staff has not briefed you on this program, would you work with me and maybe come and visit and see what we have to offer?
Senator, the SOCOM staff has briefed me. Having been appointed to West Point from Martinsburg, West Virginia, by Senator Byrd 42 years ago.
Oh, you got to come. You got no option.
I am very familiar with West Virginia and this initiative and your hosting of 2nd Battalion 19th Special Forces Group and our continuous assessment that we run in your state.
Well, we're a state that's totally committed to the defense of this country, and I think it proves that by the amount of veterans that we have who fought in every war and conflict, shed a lot of blood. So we're ready to go, and we would love to have you all there because you'd be most welcome in whatever we have to offer. I'll switch. I've always said this too. They said about West Virginians fighting. I says, when there is no really a good fight going on around the world, we fight each other just to stay in practice because we're ready, just like Alabama. So General Nakasone, this is for you, okay? As chairman of the Cyber Subcommittee, I'm particularly concerned that it is only a matter of time before cyber criminals and bad actors launch attacks on our commercial space assets, particularly our global positioning system. Cyber and space realms are intertwined, and it is imperative for Cybercom and Spacecom to work in lockstep, because of every system Spacecom uses has a cyber component that has to be secure and reliable. So how are you all working together? And if it's things you can talk about, if not, we'll do it in a secured setting.
So again, it begins with the ability for us to work closely with U.S. Space Command. We put a cyber integrated planning element into Space Command headquarters last summer. This is our ability now to work hand in hand with General Dickinson and his staff to be able to plan those type of operations.
How about Nitro?
Pardon me?
Nitro, you know.
If I might come back to you on that, Senator,
That's what
thank you.
I thought. Okay. We'll do that. And also, General Nakasone, a few weeks ago, we heard from Stratcom and Spacecom on their readiness posture. Maintaining our nuclear deterrent and preserving our ability to operate in space are fundamental to today's great power competition with Russia and China. I believe that both of these missions are connected to our cyber defensive and offensive capabilities. The cyber, space, and nuclear missions have to be interconnected and cannot operate in vacuum. So given that the cyber, my question would be, given the Cybercom is operating in a highly complex and ever-evolving environments, how integrated would you say that the efforts are between Stratcom and Spacecom right now?
Totally integrated. And it begins with the assurance of our nuclear command and control and communications capabilities.
I know that Senator King asked a question about, you know, what's going on and why haven't Russia. Are you seeing indications that we should have some concern there, that there might be movement in that area of cyber attacks?
So again, Senator, I think that the president, as he announced last week with his indications of concern, we have concerns all the time. We remain vigilant, and we will continue to remain vigilant.
Do you believe that we're adequately capable of stopping these horrible cyber attacks that could harm just the well-being of the average United States citizen?
We are, along with our partners at CISA and the private sector.
So everybody's on track. Thank you very much. No further questions.
Thank you very much, Senator Manchin. Senator Cotton, please.
Welcome, gentlemen. General Nakasone, let's talk a little bit about intelligence sharing with Ukraine. We've heard a lot about that over the last few weeks. You've mentioned a little bit today in your testimony. Can you tell us exactly, like, how does that happen for you and your people at NSA and Cybercom? Do you have partners in Ukraine that you're going direct to with intelligence we share? Is it going up in the United States government and then going to them somehow? Just give us a little more visibility.
So, Senator, if I might, I think this is a great conversation for this afternoon or right after in closed testimony, just because I can lay out the numbers and the procedures upon which we do this.
Okay. We'll have that conversation in a closed session. I would like to know what kind of limitations that you face on what you're able to share, if any. Has the administration put limitations on your ability to share actionable intelligence with Ukrainians?
So, Senator, again, there is policy guidance that we follow at the National Security Agency with regards to the sharing of that intelligence.
Are you allowed to share intelligence that would allow or facilitate strikes into the Donbas region?
Again, Senator, I think this is obviously better handled in closed testimony.
Okay, we'll talk about it in closed testimony. I certainly hope that you and the rest of our government is allowed to share such intelligence, since Russia has announced that that is the main effort in Ukraine now, and that the White House is not nervous as a cat in a room full of rocking chairs about allowing Ukraine to retake some of its territory in the Donbas. General Clarke, you've planned a mission or two in your life. Do you think it would complicate Russia's operations in the Donbas if they had to worry not just about Ukraine's defensive operations there, but also had to worry about potential offensive operations across the line of contact in the joint forces area?
Senator, I believe that any time that that any nation has increased capabilities and knowledge of their opponent, it is helpful.
I bet it would complicate the hell out of their planning, if you ask me. But anyway, we'll talk about it at closed setting. General Clarke, I want to talk to you briefly about a couple matters. The first is Afghanistan and the so-called over-the-horizon counterterrorism strikes we heard so much about last summer in the lead up to and during the collapse in Kabul. Since the last American soldier left Afghanistan, how many over-the-horizon strikes have we conducted in Afghanistan?
Senator, I'm not aware of any over-the-horizon strikes that have been conducted since we departed Afghanistan.
Yeah, unfortunately, neither am I. I think it might have been better called over-the-rainbow counterterrorism strikes at the time by the White House. Another thing, General Clarke, I want to address with you is the authorities you have. Last year, when the Biden administration took office, one of the very first actions was to remove approval delegations for actions outside of Iraq and Syria, so places like, say, Yemen. We talked about it in this hearing last year, and you probably remember me referencing a story from the previous president about his first encounter with this question when he was asked to approve a strike, and he didn't understand why some captain or major or colonel who was on the ground wasn't approving it. Has the Biden administration's policies affected your ability to get after terrorist targets in places like Yemen or Somalia or elsewhere?
Senator, I defer those specific questions to the geographic combatant commander. We continue to give that capability to those combatant commanders to conduct those strikes with our soft personnel. I defer policy over to Secretary Maier if there's anything that he would want to add on top of that.
Secretary Maier, is there anything you would like to add on top of that?
Senator, I think there's been no change in the policy from where we talked a year ago.
So at what level in the United States government does a strike against a bad guy in Yemen or Somalia have to be approved? Do you have to wake the president up in the middle of the night and ask him?
Senator, is that question for me?
Sure.
So I think it varies based on the geographic area, but there's very few that rise to the level of the White House. Most of those are within the DoD hierarchy, sir.
And at what level in the DoD hierarchy? Do they have to go to the combatant commander?
Oftentimes the combatant commander, sir, but I think it varies depending on how low they're delegated. In some cases, it's well below the combatant commander.
Okay. General Clarke, I have a lot of confidence in you and your combatant commanders, but you know who I also have a lot of confidence in? People who are doing jobs that Major and Colonel Clarke used to do back in the day. Thank you. See you in the closed setting.
Thank you very much, Senator Cotton. Senator Blumenthal, please.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for being here. Thank you all for your extraordinarily distinguished and dedicated service to our country. General Nakasone, in your responses to Senator Cotton, you didn't mean to say that we are not sharing intelligence with Ukraine, did you?
I did not. I said that, I believe, Senator, I wanted to make sure that we talked about the details in a closed setting.
But the idea that we are denying intelligence or refusing to share intelligence is incorrect.
That is correct, Senator.
Thank you. General Clarke, I wonder if you could provide some background as to why use of undersea vehicles for inserting our special operators is important, whether it is through the dry combat submersible or through the existing undersea warfare platforms that we have.
Senator, our Navy special operators can get into places that a larger maritime ship or an undersea vessel, one of the Navy submarines, cannot get into. And it provides us the opportunity, which I can cover specifics in a closed session, to get in places that we need to conduct reconnaissance in and to be able to give the joint force insights for potential future conflict and for competition.
So the smaller vehicles can enter places that submarines couldn't, which makes them potentially very valuable. And I think in response to Senator Tuberville, you talked about a little bit about the timeline. What is the fastest that we could see those dry combat submersibles available?
Senator, we are testing one now. I went on it personally within the last 12 months and found that it is almost ready at this point. We will be able to, we're still going through some specific testing of it, and I can get back to you on the record with what that specific timeline is, but we're talking months, probably not years, before it is. We're operationally validating it now to make sure it would be completely safe in an operational environment.
Are you satisfied that the budget, the 2023 budget, includes sufficient funding to make it operational during the coming year, if it's a matter of months before it would be?
Senator, I do for this year's budget, but there are additional capabilities that we will continue to advocate for to build the modernization not just of the dry combat submersible, but other undersea clandestine type vessels that will also assist us in the maritime and the littoral domain.
I'd appreciate hearing more, whether it's in a closed setting or on the record in writing, more about
Yes, sir.
this program.
I'll take that for the record, Senator.
Thank you. One other area, when I visited Ukraine just very shortly before the invasion in January, and I think I'm certain now it's a matter of public record that we had trainers there for the Ukrainian forces. How would you assess the effectiveness of the training that we gave to Ukrainians through our special operations as well as other personnel? And would such training now be useful for more of them outside of Ukraine? Obviously, we are not going to put any of our personnel into Ukraine, but if there were training outside the country for some of their special operators.
I assess that training is very effective in what we did for 8 years prior for both lethal capabilities, but also in the information operations. And I do believe that at Ukrainians' desire, based upon what they will need in the future for what could become a protracted engagement with Russia, we should look at and assess what future capabilities they will need, because they will need to have a sustained effort. And I think we could provide those if the policy is decided. But I think that would benefit the Ukrainians in the future.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, General. Thank you all.
Thank you, Senator Blumenthal. Senator Sullivan, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And gentlemen, thank you for your service here. General Clarke, I want to, well, both you and General Nakasone, I think you are two of our best four-star commanders focused on lethality, warfighting, crushing our enemies when called upon. And I just really want to thank you for that. And General Clarke, for your service. If you're going to be retiring soon, I hope you're not retiring soon, but I understand it's maybe close to 40 years now, so good luck with everything, but you've done an exceptional job, both of you have. Let me, I just want to emphasize what Senator Cotton mentioned, General Nakasone, on the intel sharing piece. I think you would get by, I know you can't say a lot here, but I think it's strong bipartisan support to the extent we can share as much intel, of course, without compromising sources and methods, with Ukrainian forces, including in eastern Ukraine. I think it's really important, and I think I'm speaking for a lot of senators on this committee. General Clarke, I have a kind of a multi-part question. Could you elaborate a little bit on SOCOM's role in building out Ukrainian special forces over the last several years? And then what lessons are we applying with regard to what we've learned there to Taiwan Special Forces? You know, one of the things that you mentioned in the What We Do section of your vision for SOCOM is helping shape the environment to reduce risk, prevent crises, and set conditions for success in competition and conflict. And I'd like to get a little sense, to the extent you can talk about it here, on what we're doing to help Taiwan the way we've helped Ukraine, particularly in the SF world.
Senator, when we first started training with the Ukrainian Special Operations over 8 years ago, they were a smaller force, and they did not necessarily have a SOCOM-like headquarters. That force grew to 3 brigade equivalents commanded by colonels and a training regiment. And they also, over the last 18 months, added a resistance company made up of what we would like a home guard that was embedded in each one of those. And that was through the persistent effort of not just the U.S., but we also brought in allies from other NATO countries.
And you're seeing, obviously, some of the success of that training and structure in the current conflict.
Yes, Senator, we are.
What about Taiwan, to the extent you can talk about that?
Senator, I would prefer to talk about Taiwan in a closed setting, but broadly, building both resistance and resilience in the force. Resistance being the ability to give the punch, but resilience being the ability to take the punch and make sure you can get back up through medical training, through logistics, and through communications is critical. And I think we got to work on both of those with other nations writ large.
Let me ask a question for both of you, kind of again a two-part question. General Clarke, Rear Admiral Howard recently wrote a piece in USNI and talked about making sure our Special Operations Forces were combat ready for new tactics, techniques, particularly in some of the most stressing environment and hard target conditions. And he talked about SOCOM competition in the high north. And are there initiatives that you are undertaking? And General Nakasone, can you talk a little bit about what NSA Alaska has been doing, the capabilities that they bring? Even a lot of Alaskans aren't aware of the great work that goes on, particularly as it relates to Russia and other places, that goes on in the high north of America and Alaska with the build-out and exceptional work that NSA Alaska is doing. General Clarke, can you take that question first, then General?
Yes, sir. I just left Norway less than 10 days ago, where I observed our Special Operations Forces working in the 200 miles north of the Arctic Circle, using all of their capabilities, insertion clandestinely, looking at hard targets, working with partners. Simultaneously, as you know, there was another exercise going on in Alaska where we also had a large contingent of all elements of our Special Operations Command that were practicing, experimenting. And so just this alone highlights for you the importance of training inside the Arctic for those hard targets in the future.
Thank you. General Nakasone.
Senator, geography matters. And as we take a look at our ability to provide both indications and warning and awareness of the Pacific, a critical element of this is what the men and women at NSA Alaska are doing today. And so that location in your home state has provided us insights into our adversaries' actions and provided protection to our forces that are deployed in that region.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Sullivan. Senator Hawley, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to all of you for being here. Thank you for your service. I want to come back to this question of Taiwan that Senator Sullivan was just asking about. Let me frame it this way. Secretary Maier, let me start with you. I think the Ukrainians are showing how effective and important irregular warfare can be for defeating an enemy invasion. And obviously, that's got a lot of potential relevance to the situation that we see in Taiwan. Our goal in Taiwan, I think, hopefully we all agree, should be to prevent an invasion. We don't want to be behind the 8 ball where we're trying to displace one. But we've got a plan for all scenarios, and so irregular warfare has an important role to play. You testified last year I'm going to quote you here, that the United States should strongly, that's your word, consider options to strengthen Taiwan's irregular warfare capabilities, including their ability to fight in depth, that's you again, using resistance networks or other capabilities after a Chinese amphibious landing. Is that still your view?
It is, Senator, and I think we're doing more work in that regard as others have testified.
Yep, perfect. Can I just ask you to expand on that? Because can you give us an update on what you're doing to help strengthen, what the Pentagon's doing to help strengthen Taiwan's irregular warfare capabilities?
So, Senator, I think General Clarke already hit on some of that. Obviously, we can only go so much in this session, but I think consistent with the Taiwan Relations Act, we are doing all we can to look at a whole of resistance approach. So in some cases, that means doing more exercises, more ability to touch aspects of the Taiwanese infrastructure and determine its both, as General Clarke said, ability to take a punch and give a punch. That's sort of the most basic level of our assessment at this point.
Very good. General, you testified also last year that, and you just reiterated it to Senator Sullivan, but you testified that you thought the United States should help Taiwan strengthen its irregular warfare capabilities. I'm assuming based on your answer just a second ago, you think that that's still a priority. Is that fair to say?
All in accordance with our policies. But Senator, if I could take it a bit broader.
Yeah.
It's not just about Taiwan either. It's also the other more than 15 countries that we're working with in the Indo-Pacific that are like-minded, have the same values, and have the same interest. And so bolstering their defenses and ensuring they are seeing the same pernicious behavior that we have seen on behalf of the Chinese is critical. Because I'd rather be looking at 15 nations aligned or 20 nations aligned than just one or two.
Sure, absolutely. I agree with that 100%. And as you may or may not know, I've introduced a bill called the Armed Taiwan Act, which would create the Taiwan Security Assistance Initiative modeled on the Ukraine Security Assistance Initiative that would help accelerate, the idea is help accelerate Taiwan's deployment of critical asymmetrical defenses. I think it's critical we learn the right lessons from what we're seeing in Ukraine. Obviously, deterrence failed in Ukraine. We don't want to see deterrence fail in Taiwan. We just simply can't afford that. And making sure that they are in a position, the Taiwanese are in a position to wage irregular warfare if necessary, and China knows they can do that, I think is critical. General, let me ask you a related question. What role do you see SOCOM playing in helping to deter or, if necessary, defeat a Chinese invasion of Taiwan?
Senator, I describe our role in that as the war around the edges, and being able to hold hard targets at risk to ensure that we provide the National Command Authority those options. And that is set up by conducting reconnaissance and ensuring, as I addressed to other members, building the undersea capabilities that we need today, ensuring that we are postured in places around the globe that can pull that. That's combining elements like cyber, space, and special operations forces together to provide unique capabilities for our nation.
Let me ask you if you've been able to use any resources freed up from our withdrawal from Afghanistan to invest in more capabilities relevant to the Taiwan scenario.
Senator, we have put additional forces into both the Indo-Pacific theater and into the European theater over the last 3 years. I'd say we started the rebalancing of some of the soft requirements based upon the 2018 National Defense Strategy that identified the threats from near-peer competitors.
But I guess my question is, has the withdrawal from Afghanistan, has that freed up resources that you've been able to repurpose to this theater for this pacing scenario?
I can't draw a direct correlation from one to another, but fundamentally, we do not have as many people in Afghanistan, today. We have no people in Afghanistan today.
Got it. I've got some additional questions that I'll give to you each for the record. Thank you for your service. Thank you for being here. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Hawley. Senator Scott, please.
Thank you, Chair Reed. General Clarke, what does the future operating environment look like for special operation forces over the next 5, 10, and 20 years? And do you expect to need more personnel and resources given the threat from Communist China, Russia, and an emboldened Iran?
Senator, I think we have the sufficient amount of forces that we need today that exist within the force. We've just now this year gotten to the first time where we actually have a predictable schedule that all of our forces are on a 2-to-1 deployment to dwell or greater. And so the force that we have is right. In some cases, though, we actually need to make some changes within the force that we have to be able to put towards the capabilities that we will need. For example, potentially more information operators that we will need in the future. So we may have to have less in one area, but actually look at where we need to put more in the future. And what we do need is a continued sustained budget that will allow for the increased modernization and readiness so that we can build those capabilities in time for the department.
Thank you. General, as we know, President Biden's budget doesn't stay up with the raging inflation we're seeing right now. Are there any assets or any spending you would do that you would like to do that you'll be unable to do because of the budget basically being cut when you look at the inflation?
Senator, we have submitted an unfunded requirement list that hits specifically to the points. And top line, that asks for additional funding in the information operations, in artificial intelligence and machine learning. It hits on some, the speeding up of some of our modernization of our clandestine insertion maritime, but also looks at developing counter-UAS, unmanned aerial systems, to be able to protect our forces that are forward. And that will speed those processes up in the future.
Sure. We've watched Vladimir Putin's aggression against Ukraine, and I think we're all disappointed that President Biden didn't do enough to deter it. But what can special operations continue to do to assist Ukraine and support our other partners that hopefully will help Ukraine win against Russia, and also make sure that Putin doesn't feel emboldened to invade a NATO country?
Senator, I'd highlight a few. Number one is continue to ensure the lethal aid makes it into the Ukraine, and for special operators to make sure that it gets to the Ukrainian Special Operations Forces that I think are doing a fantastic job today inside the Ukraine. But we also have to be predictive and work with the Ukrainians on not what they need today, but as this potentially goes into protracted conflict, what will they need in the future? And it may not be as much on the lethal side, but it may be other capabilities, whether it's mobility or whether it's first aid or whether it's protection. And I think we have to be predictive to that. And the other one is already hit, is the continued info and intel sharing about what is going on. And we could talk about that separately.
Is there any lessons learned from how U.S. Special Operations Forces have been able to help Ukraine that we can apply to potentially what's going to happen when China invades Taiwan or Iran continuing to threaten Israel?
Yes, sir. Number one is it's not just the U.S. And Ukraine. While we're sitting here, we have 16 NATO nations all on their own accord that are currently working with our Special Operations Command Europe, and they are collaborating, they are sharing, and they are sensing what is happening in that environment that would then collectively be able to provide the best support to Ukraine. And I think the same lessons could be applied in other theaters. The second one is, though, getting ahead of it. The more that you can set up for success today, the better off you will be. And having the urgency to see that in advance and not waiting until the end.
Thanks. General Nakasone, what has Cybercommand been able to do to increase its efforts to protect our public and private infrastructure from bad actors from Russia?
Senator, several things. First of all, deploying a team to the Ukraine to see what our adversaries are doing and being able to capture their malware and their tradecraft and share that broadly with the private sector. Secondly, it's working with the lead for this, which is DHS CISA, and providing the capacity if necessary and also the collaboration that's ongoing. And the last piece is working broadly with the private sector, particularly our defense industrial base, to ensure that they have an understanding of the tactics and techniques our adversaries are using.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair Reed.
Thank you very much, Senator Scott. And gentlemen, thank you too. I will adjourn the open session. We will reconvene in SVC 217 in approximately 10 minutes to begin the closed session. Thank you very much, gentlemen.